Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Mary Greening, and I am a member of the Kony Basecamp community team. Thank you for joining us today for the Fireside Chat about PWAs with Kony customer Alex Cobb, CTO at VESTIS, and Faizan Khalidi, a Senior Director of Product Management at Kony. Today, Alex and Faizan will go over the good, the bad, the interesting, and the useful when it comes to PWA development. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. Please ask your questions using the Q&A box in BrightTalk. We are also recording this webinar and will post it in the webinar promotion page on Basecamp as soon as possible. We have 2 polls running today, so be sure and share your vote. Thank you again for joining. Over to you, Faizan.
Thanks, Mary. And Alex, thank you for joining us for this chat today. It's a pleasure to have you here. Alex, let me start by asking you about your company. Can you tell us more about your company and what you do?
Sure, yeah, and thanks for including me in this webinar this morning. So VESTIS is an international real estate advisory company. We basically connect buyers and sellers in a global private marketplace for high-end real estate. We recognize that high-end real estate has unique requirements and a unique audience. And so we've created a specialized private marketplace to enable our buyers to discover, explore, share, and inquire in their interest to learn more about these properties and ultimately connect buyers and sellers together. And we're a small startup company, so my role is CTO and marketing and treasury and accounting and everything. So we're a small number of people doing a lot of things. But in my capacity, I've done all the code development, all the content management. So I've basically written all the code for our PWA and our native apps. So I've had a lot of first-hand experience in developing the technology stack and managing this small business.
Sure, that's very interesting, Alex. So we know that you wanted to develop an application for your company, and based on your use case, I'm sure you had certain objectives and you may have evaluated different options. So what was what decisions did you make in selecting the right approach, between native, web, hybrid, and progressive web apps? How did you, make your decision, and what were your objectives?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So, our objective was we wanted to create an exceptional, best-in-class experience because these are exceptional properties. We wanted to make sure that our experience in exploring those properties was equally exceptional. Kind of the core scenario was we wanted to be able to remove all friction and make it very easy for our buyers and sellers to discover our services, discover our properties, and then engage more deeply. We found that the mobile experience was often the first experience, but we also recognized that our properties didn't really present well on a tiny device. So we really focused on using the mobile experience to capture interest and get them engaged, and then ultimately direct them to a desktop experience where they could really lean in and see the full screen video and images that we had to represent these properties. Because we're a small company, and I've got to write all the code and fix all the bugs, I was very keen on making sure that we had a really effective sort of rapid prototype to production development experience that wasn't going to result in me accumulating a lot of technical debt or overhead. We want to constantly be evolving, and we don't want to be digging our way out of debt. We had done some development on iOS and some development on the web, and we wanted to reuse those investments. We didn't want to throw things away. I realize a lot of us are in more of a brownfield environment where we can't just reinvent everything. We've got existing investments that we wanted to leverage. But those existing investments resulted in a really great iOS experience that very few people had access to because, the discoverability of the app was difficult, and then, requiring them to go to the store and download and install the app was just another obstacle. So we found that that great experience had a very limited audience. And then when we went to build our web experience, I, personally built a lot of poor web experiences. I was pretty disappointed with the options and the tools that I had available and what those results were. My experience was in building a web app, and in an effort to make it look great on the mobile device and on the desktop, I ultimately had to whittle down all that functionality and remove a lot of those great experiences just to make it work. And so we initially explored progressive web apps because we were very unhappy with our existing web development and the experiences we created. And that was using basic HTML5 and CSS and your typical sort of Bootstrap and other types of frameworks. The effort to make it look great on all the browsers and all the devices was just taking too much time, and the ultimate experience that was yielded just simply wasn't good enough. And so that was sort of the impetus of looking at progressive web apps as a start, where I just wasn't happy with where we were from a web dev perspective.
That's very insightful, Alex. So yeah, there's always that decision-making process to find the right fit, to find the right approach between, there are several options today, building a native app versus building a web application, or do I go ahead and, do something which is a hybrid app, or this new web app technology where we have progressive web apps, right? So it's kind of it is a big decision-making process. So I kind of have a follow-up question on that. So you had well-defined requirements, and based on that, what features were you looking for in your application which made you decide to go the progressive web app route?
Yeah, it's a good question. Just on that previous slide, one of the other decision points that we made when we were looking for our technology stack going forward is I wanted to be building on a trusted platform. I spent some time, with all these sort of open source frameworks and cobbling things together off the internet, and I was worried that I was going to, paint myself into a corner with something that was unmanageable and sustainable and would be difficult to make secure and performant. So I wanted to start with a really robust platform so I could build for the future. The slide you're showing now shows kind of the results of our proof of concept that I think articulates a lot of the feature functionality. So, accessible on all devices and platforms was a big one. I mean, our progressive web app looks good on IE, which was a big win. And of course, it looks good on Android and on iOS. So being able to have a very rich user experience across all those devices was maybe, the first and foremost objective. And then from there, because the discoverability was important, we wanted to make sure that we could, really optimize for search engine optimization. We wanted to make sure that we could enable sharing through open graph tags and, do all the traditional stuff that you would do for a website. But where the progressive web app started to really differentiate was the local storage. That's probably the single biggest thing. If you reflect back on the experience that we were trying to create, our audience, who are looking to discover homes or promote their homes, they have a pretty short attention span. And so if it takes a long time to, pull up the app and load the media, you just lose the interest. Our scenario was you've got 90 seconds to capture someone's interest. You're, in a business environment or a social function and you want to show them something on your phone. The amount of time that it took to, find the website, load it up, and then download all the media was just sort of intolerable. We wanted to make sure we had rich media because that was sort of the intent, was to show great media. And so having, offline storage where once that app was loaded on the device the first time, the second time you went back, it loaded instantly. That was a big win for us. The edge-to-edge mobile screen utilization was important as well. I mean, the mobile devices are already pretty small. And so if you're giving up real estate for the address bar and other things like that, you're just taking pixels away that you could be using to present your services and your products. And then from the folks in my company and our partners, whether they're brokers or other services that support our clientele, giving them the ability to save that icon to their home screen was huge. Again, if you just think about how long it takes to type in a web address or even pull up a bookmark on a mobile device, it just takes too long. And so clicking on that icon and pulling up cached media on the device that was the big win. That really enabled our first step experience. And I would say the other piece of the progressive web app piece that we liked is all that stuff just works, and the user didn't really have to know how it worked, right? Because our users don't care. They just want it to work. So it just felt really integrated with the phone experience. Everyone's used to seeing an icon on their phone. They click it, it opens it up. The fact is progressive or native, many of our clients don't know the difference. And so we were able to create a great experience that was easy for them to access. So all that went really well. I think as we looked at that transition, so again, thinking about the mobile as your first encounter, we really wanted to drive people to go to their desktop. We really wanted them to explore these properties on a much larger screen. And so I'll talk more about this as we go through our discussion this morning, but we didn't feel like those experiences, desktop and mobile, should be the same, because what users are doing with those two different screen sizes is different, but they had to be consistent. It had to be familiar. So we wanted them to discover us on the mobile device, and then when they directed themselves to explore those properties deeper on the desktop, it had to look like a smooth, continuous, continuum from the mobile to the desktop. And so, having one progressive web app stack that could render across all those different screen sizes, but optimized for those experiences, was a key piece of what we were trying to achieve. So that was really the basis of the progressive web app stack. Now, in addition to that, referencing what I mentioned a moment ago about leveraging existing resources, we wanted to make sure that we could plug into our continuous development, continuous deployment, continuous integration infrastructure. We wanted to be able to leverage some of the services we already started to use. For example, AWS, we were heavily using Cognito and S3 and Lambda functions behind the API gateway. And so the Kony Fabric made it easy for us to quickly and easily leverage those things. So the prototyping was quick and easy, and it wasn't throwaway code. That's all production level code that we could carry forward. We had a lot of legacy JavaScript frameworks that we had played with before that we ultimately are probably going to replace, but it was really helpful to be able to just cut and paste that code into our progressive web app. Tremendous amount of reuse. I've spoken before about how we were able to build a progressive web app in a couple of days, but truthfully, part of that was because we were leveraging the work that we had done previously. We didn't have to write a lot of new code. We could leverage the existing code that we had. And then while we really believe in progressive web apps and the capabilities that they have, which are increasing seemingly on a week-by-week basis, we recognize that there was still a need for a native app. Some of our clients just really wanted that feel of a app store app. They felt it gave a small company like us credibility to be in the app store. So we knew we wanted to continue to have an iOS experience. And so our ability to build that progressive web app quickly and easily was great. And then we had tremendous reuse of the code and the forms and those experiences in quickly turning around and building an iOS app, and then subsequently Android. And that allowed us to do some of the differentiating things that the iOS native can do above and beyond progressive web apps. So yeah, I think that we kind of touched all the core points on PWA. It's a pretty simple and basic web experience, but offline storage and launch from the home screen and a beautiful edge-to-edge rendering of our photos. Those were the core things that we wanted, and we were very uncompromising about our willingness to sacrifice the experiences.
Sure, Alex, thanks for the details. Just before I move ahead, a quick reminder to all our attendees. So we have a couple of polls that are coming your way, and if you are in a full screen mode, you may not see the polls. So if you're you would see the polls if you're not in the full screen mode. So going back, Alex, to the application. So you said you have rich media within your application. I think that's the core content of your application. And, while native UX is, unmatched in terms of providing that rich media experience and things like that, you also wanted your, your users to have a faster and easier way to access the content on your application on both mobile as well as on desktop. And you know, you of course said the PWA provides a lot better engagement in terms of, you know, search engine optimization and things like that. So that gives us some very good insights into your decision-making process and, you know, the features that you were looking for in your app. I'm sure our attendees would love to see the app and a demo of it. So let's move on to the demo. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, great. So you go ahead and push the play button here. So for the folks on the call, this is a quick video that we made about the app. It starts off in the mobile view. So this is, you know, looking at our experience on a mobile device in a portrait landscape, portrait layout. And so, you know, it's your basic web app. So you've got your kind of corporate information. So what's our vision, our design, our origin, you know, basic information about the company. And then we've got, you know, legalese and contact information. So these were the kind of the basic things that we had to add to the app. In addition to the about, we've got some explanation of our services. And this is an example of us being able to create that layout that's going to properly fit the screen. So when we get to the desktop in a moment, you'll see this same layout rendered differently to better utilize the larger screen space. But this was just a simple rendering of what our buyer services are, and then it scrolls down and shows the seller services as well. When it came to the contact information, this was, again, an area where we're able to leverage the integration that's pretty universally implemented across the different mobile devices and browsers, where you can, you know, click on a link and send an SMS. You click on a link and send an email. It's pretty straightforward. The view that you're seeing now, this is the view of the collection. So, you know, as you can see, it's a pretty small picture. But what we wanted to enable was the ability for you to take a look at the different properties, and then you could, you know, click a link to share that information with someone else, or to send an email to yourself even to show you, so you could, you know, look at that same property once you got back to a desktop environment. But it's a pretty, you know, basic UX. You can see there's a bit of animation there. You can click into these, you know, top level photos, and then you would see, you know, more details about that particular property. And then in some cases, we actually have video as well. Here, what you're seeing is the ability for you to pull up that bottom menu and add it to the desktop. And there you can see the icon is added to that desktop. And when you click on that icon, now you're opening the app up in that, you know, full screen edge-to-edge mode. And as we're clicking into the photos, you can see the different photos of this particular property. Now, as I'm looking at those photos, they're being cached locally. So if I were to shut the app down, turn off the phone, whatever, and go back, I'm able to see those same images without having to hit the internet. So, you know, in a lot of situations, there's just poor connectivity still. We're all sort of used to ubiquitous bandwidth, but it's not always there. So the ability to, you know, instantly pull that app back up and browse through those photos, that was a big part of the experience we wanted to create on a mobile device. Now, a moment ago, you saw that I sent an email to myself from the mobile device. And so what you're seeing here is going to my desktop, opening that mail, and now I'm looking at the same website. You can see that we've rendered the pages a little bit different to look more elegantly on the larger screen size, and now you can see a much better experience in drilling in and looking at those photos. Obviously, here we wanted to present really high-resolution photos that you could look at on a large screen, but we wanted to also have that consistency. And then the last step was our ultimate goal, which is, you know, having seen this property, we wanted to encourage our buyers to reach out and ask for more information or be connected with the seller so that we could, you know, ultimately facilitate them acquiring the home. So that was sort of the quick end-to-end demo, but really that's the core of it. We tried to keep things pretty simple. Our users were just looking for a simple, great experience. We didn't need to you have a lot of complex UI or deep menu structures, or we used some lightweight animation that came for free, and we were very happy with the ultimate experience that we were able to create.
That was impressive, Alex. I think so. We saw the demo of your web application on both mobile and desktop. We saw the features of progressive web apps as well. Where you had this application anchored to the home screen on mobile, and then the offline experience and all that. So based on your experience, since progressive web apps provide a lot of value over a traditional web app, a website, or a traditional web application, do you think they are more difficult to build? And how does Kony Visualizer, or how does Kony Visualizer simplify this for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I went through a bit of a learning journey on just trying to understand what progressive web apps were. It was a bit confusing to me when I first started, because I thought they were something different, and I think I've evolved my thinking into this, the view that it's really a progression, and so you can take really any web app and make it progressive. You're just simply leveraging the service worker, and if you follow all the rules and create the manifest, you get all this additional functionality. So I can't imagine why you wouldn't make your web app progressive. You're just leveraging these new services and interactions that you can have with the browser to create a better experience on both the mobile and the desktop. So I think that it wasn't really sort of a choice for web versus progressive web. It's like once we realized we could build a progressive web app, we wanted to go in that direction. As far as where Kony helped, and I'll dig into this in a little bit more detail as we go through these next couple of slides. I had started doing work with Kony on iOS, and I was just very, very happy with how productive my experience was. I started that journey without being a really deep iOS developer, and I was able to very quickly build apps, and then as I learned more, I was able to really leverage all the native functionality and build great iOS apps. And so when I started to explore new or different options for the web, Kony had just come out with the progressive web app stack, and that was just a logical place for me to start. And so, the ability to, I think that, previous slides sort of stated what the POC experience was like. It was a very rapid, prototype to production experience. We were able to build something quickly and then make use of what we built as a prototype and convert that into hardened production enterprise, quality code. So I think, the tooling that Kony provides certainly helped me get through the learning curve and helped me be productive. To kind of frame some of those learnings, I put a couple of slides together here that talk about what those learnings really were. And so there's a whole lot of good. So these are the good, the bad, and the useful and the interesting from a progressive web app perspective. So the first was productivity. I think the information on the internet is getting better about explaining progressive web apps. And really there's just a few basic concepts that you have to get your head around, and they're very much additive. And then there's really good tooling support, certainly from Kony. And then the Chrome provides some good dev tools to do testing and validation. So I was able to be productive really quickly. I was able to build a progressive web app really quickly, and not just a proof of concept throwaway demo, but something that I could use to validate that this was going to work. I was able to show it to my colleagues and my partners to show the direction and sort of get support for us to pursue progressive web apps as our web path forward. So very, very high productivity very quickly. From an experience perspective, I was impressed by what I could do with progressive web apps. I think one of my early misconceptions was that when I first explored progressive web apps, they all seemed very simple and utilitarian, and they seemed to be focused on supporting sort of low bandwidth scenarios, and it didn't feel like a right fit for me. But really what I learned is that you can build really rich apps as a progressive web app. You're not really limited. And today there's a tremendous amount of access to the mobile iOS, functionality, whether it's, sending mail or geolocation or, just accessing the things that you would normally expect to find in the native app. There was a lot there. And then for Android, I found that there was even more. And most importantly, and when I think about, building technology, I don't think about building something for this month or this quarter. I want to build something for the next several years. And so I'm pretty confident at this point that progressive web apps are taking off. There seems to be universal support across all the devices and the browsers. So it just seems like there's more functionality coming out on a pretty rapid basis. So there's plenty of capabilities for you to build great experiences today, and it's only going to get better. The compatibility thing was a really big one for us. I would say that my past web experience was I could quickly build a good to great experience on my Mac on a particular browser, but then as I tried to replicate that experience across different devices and across different browsers, I spent a tremendous amount of time tuning and tweaking the code. And so I was very impressed by using the Kony Visualizer. The progressive web app that I was able to build was almost immediately out of the box a Lighthouse 100 score, and it worked really well across all the different browsers and devices. And that certainly was not my experience when I was using other HTML5 frameworks and my previous web dev experience. The other big piece of my experience was with iOS. I kind of went through the process of figuring out how to publish an app into the App Store and wait for them to review it, and that was never a good experience. And so I was very keen to be able to avoid that, basically, circumnavigate the whole publishing to the App Store experience. And so I could, build an app, publish an app, and it was immediately available. And if I ran into a problem or I wanted to add some functionality, or we do not so much A/B testing, but a lot of iterative development to try to create the best experience, we were able to make a change and publish it in real time. So there was no delay, and we felt that was really important for us to be able to make rapid progress, is to not create some long development cycle. And we wanted to leverage our existing infrastructure for CI/CD and making sure that we were building solid code and being able to iterate and make constant change. The discoverability was another big one. Our business has, just as an aside, our business has evolved to a point where we're really focusing on being quite private. So it's this proof of concept was an entry point, but we're now moving to the direction where it's really an invitation-only private marketplace. But we still need people to discover that the company exists and to enable them to, request access and just engage with us. And we weren't able to do that effectively at all in the App Store. We were just too small. We were never going to make the top app list or something like that. And so they really had to know what they were going to find the app in the app stores. But by leveraging just basic search engine optimization and leveraging social sharing through open graph tags, we were able to make discoverability really easy. And then when it came time for them to access our media and our content, they didn't have to download the app or go to the store. So that discoverability process was great. We're still looking at native apps, but we feel like the first step is on the web, because that's the fastest path to get them engaged. And then leveraging the legacy in the web. I mean, we didn't have a lot, and some of it wasn't very good, so I was happy to discard it. But we had some JavaScript frameworks. We had some scripts that we had written ourselves, and a lot of CSS customization. The sort of CSS hell of you start with this clean CSS view of your app, and then as you try to tweak it for all different browsers, it can become a real mess. And so I was happy that we were able to leverage what we wanted to, but ultimately end up with a really clean JS and CSS code in the progressive web app. And then lastly, I was very impressed with and I'll talk about this more on the tooling side, but the ability to build, deploy, and test and monitor was pretty seamless using Kony Visualizer and then deploying to the Kony host. And so we got a lot of out-of-the-box functionality, including some basic reports and analytics. But we were able to still continue to use our investments in Google Analytics, across iOS and the web. So that was really important. We made some pretty, non-trivial investments in Google Analytics, and it was easy to extend that and plug that into our progressive web app. So all in all, there was a lot of good on the good side.
Sure, Alex. Yes, we have been, in the last couple of releases of the Kony app platform, there have been multiple, investments that we have made, not only in terms of improving the overall web development experience, but, bringing in the latest in web and the latest in modern web, right? Like providing the capabilities for progressive web apps and providing the capabilities for the web messages and things like that. So tremendous amount of investments in the last couple of releases of the Kony app platform. I'm sure our customers are going to love that. Now we have talked about the good, and I'm sure you have developed a lot of applications, or you have worked with teams that have developed a lot of different web and native applications. Were there any limitations that you observed, while developing the progressive web app?
Yeah, sure. So there certainly were some, and there were trade-offs, of course. I would say in this list articulates just a few, probably not a comprehensive list. We still need, as much as I was impressed by how well the cross-device and browser compat was, we still needed to test across all the devices and do a little bit of tuning. But the tooling made that pretty easy. Right now, progressive web app seems to be a fast-moving standard, if you will. I'm not sure it even is a standard, but there are definitely different implementations across the different OSs and different browsers. So you'll still need to do testing across browsers, and you'll probably need to tuck in and make some changes to tweak the formatting and things like that so it works great. At this point, there's just so many device sizes that it requires a little bit of tweaking. There were some limitations that we found in iOS, and these may be evolving, but this was my latest understanding, was that iOS still didn't support web push, but you could use SMS as a simple workaround on mobile. And then, as you saw in the demo, on iOS, if you want to add the icon to the home screen, the user has to go and open that bottom menu and click that button. The functionality is there, but it's certainly not intuitive. And so you're best to, when it comes to iOS, to write a little bit of code that prompts the user and basically gives them the instruction, a little arrow pointing down saying, hey, click this button and you can add this app to your desktop on the phone. Android, it just works, which was great. Android seems to detect it's a PWA and just prompts you to add it to the home screen without any sort of custom code. So that was a pretty straightforward from those user experiences. The other big limitation that we came across was the cache file size, and this is one of the reasons why we continue to have an iOS app, and we're looking at rolling out Android. There are different limitations on the cache sizes across these different operating systems and browsers, but generally speaking, it seemed like about 60 megabytes was the limit. And in our app, we had lots of high-res photos, but we also had high-res video, and the videos could be quite large. I initially got some questions about why we would put such high-resolution media on the phone, and the answer was simply that our sales folks, as they're out engaging with clients, they have the ability to plug the phone into an HDMI cable and project it on a giant screen. So even though that device was tiny, some of our use cases were a phone plugged into an overhead monitor where we wanted to have the rich video on that device. And that was really one of the most sort of killer experiences that we had from our iOS experience, was to walk into a meeting with nothing but a cell phone and be able to show a 1080p video on the overhead. So there's still a need and an opportunity to leverage the capabilities of native apps. But man, you can do a lot with 60 megabytes on the mobile device with PWA. The other thing that was a little complicated, and this might be just my learning curve, but it seemed like caching images was like just out of the box, it just worked. But when it came to caching other things like video or enabling selective offline control, where you could say, I want to download these images but not these images, that obviously required a little bit of code. And so it's very doable, but that was something that you didn't get for free, if you will. And then the second to last was some of the rich UX experiences. I was generally very pleased with video playback and image representation, but when it came to animation, within that user experience and enabling things like Touch ID for login, those still are not available to my knowledge on the progressive web app stack. You can have some light, Java script animation, but you can do a whole lot more on those native apps, and including like adding widgets for Android and stuff like that. So I think those will come. I think that the progressive web app stack is going to be continue to expand, and I think it's hopefully going to get really competitive across the different devices and browsers, so that there's kind of a race to the best as far as providing great experiences for progressive web. And then there's a whole long list of the little things that don't quite work yet on progressive web apps, like beacons and geofences. We didn't have a need for those in particular, but there are still some of those things that are coming, and I expect they'll come fairly quickly and fairly soon. But overall, these were more obstacles. They weren't sort of deal breakers. And so our initial goal of just high discoverability, rapid access, and enabling them to have a frictionless experience to get engaged and then go deeper on the desktop, we were able to achieve all of those goals. So none of the bad sort of prevented us from achieving our objectives.
Yes. So yeah, progressive web apps, the way they work is, they're built on top of the underlying browsers, and based on that, they pick up all the features or they all the capabilities that the underlying platform provides, or the underlying browser provides. Now, what is impressive to see is that we've seen a lot of investment by the top platforms like Google, Microsoft, and Apple with their browsers like Chrome, Edge, and Safari over the last few, I wouldn't even say years, I would say the last few months or maybe a year and a half. There have been massive investments in supporting the progressive web app technology, right? So there have been investments by Safari to start supporting things like service workers, or to start supporting, all the offline capabilities and things like that. While they're still lagging behind a bit in the features like being able to send web push notifications to an iPhone. Yet they do support that on a Mac, on the browser, on the Mac OS, on the desktop, but not yet on the device. So there is a bit of a bit of a difference in the terms of the amount of support that cache to service workers. We talked about the application shell, where it kind of makes the web application kind of look and behave like a native app. Then we talked about the app icon being anchored to the desktop, or the capability to send web push messages. Which PWA feature impressed you the most, Alex?
Yeah, I think it was I would say from a PWA perspective, what impressed me the most was offline cache. And how simple it was. I mean, so I mentioned earlier about that there's a couple of simple concepts. So you have this web manifest. It's just a simple JSON file where I don't know, I've only got about 12 entries in my manifest. It's not a complicated piece of code. By setting that up, I could just quickly access the service worker. That wasn't intuitively obvious to me when I started, but once I saw how simple it was, that was pretty impressive, and I can imagine how that's going to evolve. I would say the thing that impressed me the most from my experience building progressive web app with Kony was how quickly I could build something that looked great on all these different devices and browsers. That was the big win, because that was just, if I think about my pyramid of need, first and foremost, it had to look great everywhere. And then second, ideally, it had to be performant where you weren't waiting, for downloads. And then the third would be the discoverability. So all those things kind of coming together, all three of them impressed me for different reasons. But yeah, I think that the service worker is really the core. And I imagine that now that they've gone through the hard work of rolling out the service worker in a fairly consistent way, you've got one manifest file that is used by all these different browsers. I think there's going to be a hockey stick of innovation and more features and capabilities coming fast and furious as there's more competition in the space. So yeah, overall I'm impressed. I would say that I think one of the faults of progressive web apps is in the beginning they didn't do a great job of promoting what a progressive web app was. And there's a lot of this conception that it's something different. And I don't see it that way. I think it's an evolution of your web app taking advantage of, better capabilities in the browser. So I see you've pulled up my interesting slide. This is sort of, some of my, pontification on my dev experience. One of the things that worked really well for me with progressive web apps, but really mostly with respect to the Kony Visualizer was, there's this, expression, make it work, make it right, make it fast. It's a little oversimplified, but ultimately, when you're doing a proof of concept or you're evaluating some technology, you want to quickly, return some results that you can use to prove to yourself that this is the right direction. But very often in larger companies, you need to prove it to other people, right? So you want to make something that works really quickly. And then you want to, obviously as you build a prototype or a demo, you might cut some corners here and there. So then you need to kind of make it right. So remove all your hacks and whatever you did to kind of, rapidly build something. And then lastly, on the web, it seems like I'm just constantly looking at opportunities to performance tune to make it faster. And so for progressive web apps, I was very quickly able to make it work. And then with Kony, the notion of a graphical, WYSIWYG design experience, those are usually great to build something quickly, but then you're often really constrained by what you've built. Whereas with the visualizer, I could drag and drop and leverage existing capabilities. Like drag a login form onto the page, and suddenly I've got wired up login. I was able to build things really quickly, but then when it came time to harden that code and make it work right, I could double click and drill down into the code itself. It wasn't hidden from me. So I could see exactly how things worked. I could understand my vulnerabilities, and I could harden and tune that code. And then lastly, as far as making it fast, I didn't have to do a lot. I think that on the web you have to pay attention to your media, because that can be one of the biggest performance issues is, oversized files and video that doesn't stream properly. But other than those two things, the apps were performance. They worked well. They were quick and responsive to the touch on the device. Touch worked really well. So I was pretty happy with my ability to go from the prototype to production. And I think others, as you're looking at exploring any new technology, you kind of go through that same process. You got to get it to work, and then you got to make sure you've built something that's going to last. And then, of course, it's got to be fast, or people, the experience won't be there. The other sort of big takeaway that I had is I kind of started by thinking, about, all right, we want to create this common experience, where the mobile and the desktop look the same. And we really departed from that. And we think about the mobile as, what you're doing on your phone is different from what you do on the desktop. And so we really like the idea of using progressive web apps as a single stack where we could create these experiences that were consistent, so you knew that you were still in the same experience when you went from the mobile device to the desktop, but they were optimized for what you wanted to do in those different experiences. And then, of course, leveraging the same code base enabled that high level of productivity. The other takeaway that I had, and I'm still sort of working through, is we were often trying to force the media to fit into the app, and we've sort of changed our outlook there, and we're really thinking about making the content, designing the content for the experience. So, one of the classic examples is, people watch a lot of video on their phone. So, and most people, you can turn the phone sideways, but most people look at a phone in portrait. So why not make portrait videos? It sort of pains me when I watch someone, use one of our apps and they're sitting there looking at a picture and they're holding the phone in portrait and it's just a tiny little photo. And so we thought, well, instead of trying to force the user to change their behavior, let's change the content and make that content designed for what the user's trying to do. They're looking at their phone in portrait. Let's give them portrait, shot video. Let's make sure that we can right-size the images, whether it's, delivering WebP files to iOS, which are much smaller than a JPEG, or just making sure that you're only delivering the file size needed to support the device screen size. That has a huge impact on the performance of the app overall. And then, video streaming. I'm still shocked by how many web experiences I have with video where you have to wait for the whole video to download. And so there's plenty of services that are out there that can stream the video and to give you that, once you get a couple of bytes down, it'll start playing the video. And again, like the image optimization, you can optimize the video as well. So you're not pulling down a 1080p video on a device unless you want to. So we really rethought about how we were designing both our apps and experiences, but also the content. And then the next point here is now this is sort of our outlook, and others, take a more sort of, iOS app as their standard. And I know there's a lot of, from a branding perspective and just sort of, we have an app. They want to have a real native experience, but we felt like this is more of a continuum. So we're really directing people to progressive web app first. That's the hook. That's the easy entry. And then once they've got interest, sure, then you can lead them through the more costly experience of actually going to the App Store and finding the app and downloading the app, getting updates and all that kind of stuff. But you can avoid a lot of that with progressive web apps. You don't have to deal with app updates. You don't have to get the user to go find your app. So we really feel like progressive web apps delivers all that we need for that first step. And then from there, the continuum is to bring them to the desktop or to bring them to a richer native experience. But we're always starting with progressive. And then the last one is, there's a lot of mobile-first discussion out there, and I truly believe in that if you just look at the stats on how much time people spend on their mobile device. And certainly when I look at our users' behavior, there's a tremendous amount of mobile time. But ultimately for us, the desktop experience was really important. And so we started by having this great iOS app and then a poor web app. And we fixed that, but if I were to go back and redo this effort, I would have started with the web, building a great web experience for mobile and for desktop, and then I would go build the great iOS if needed or the great Android if needed. But, for me, given the nature of the rich media and that more of a lean-in, interactive experience versus, the casual sort of snacking on internet information on your mobile phone, we really wanted to drive into desktop, and so we needed to have a great desktop web experience. We're not building any desktop apps per se. We're just doing web. So I would say that we're mobile first, but we're really web first more than anything else. So those were my sort of musings on just general approaches to what we were trying to build and some of the ways that we approached our decision-making process.
Yes, Alex, totally agree. I think mobile is important. I think the desktop experience is important as well. So there, and that's where where we come in, and as part of the Kony Visualizer, we provide the capability of reuse between not only mobile and desktop, but we've added the simple tooling around our responsive web capability, where you can set the different breakpoints to kind of achieve a layout that not only looks good or lays out well on a desktop but also it lays it pretty well on the mobile as well, right? So you can kind of define different breakpoints for different channels like mobile, tablets, and desktop. And you also talked about a few things like, the manifest file and, the service workers and things like that. So I think what we did is we kind of provided this low-code capability to design and develop, responsive web and PWA applications through Kony, right? So you don't have to, we already prepackage a manifest for our users. The users can go in and edit that manifest based on their application needs. So it kind of makes the entire development of the PWA application pretty straightforward, and it gives a fast start to the users, and then it goes on through a simple route. One quick thing, one question I had based on what you said was like, what would be the advice? What would you kind of advise your developer or developers who are planning to build PWA apps? What would be your advice? What did you find most useful?
Yeah, I would say, it's good that you go to the useful slide. I mean, my first response would be just get started. It's worth it. I mean, we're all highly, constrained as far as how much time we have. And so, I'm sure all of us sit there and we see all these technologies and tools flying by, and we're like, if I only had the time, I would check them all out. Progressive web apps I feel like we're all required to check them out. I think we're going to quickly get to a place where it's going to be odd to have a website that's not progressive. So I would say just get started. And my experience with Kony was such that I was able to get started and be productive pretty quickly. And I've got a short attention span like anybody else, and so if I try something and I'm not making any headway, I'll lose interest pretty fast. But just getting started with progressive web apps, I think of the tooling that I've looked at, Kony seemed to give a pretty good sort of jump-off point as far as getting started. You're opening up a tool, it's got a great visualizer, and then you just kind of build and deploy, and then bang, you've got your progressive web app running locally, and then you click the publish, and there's your manifest, and you can run your testing and validate that it's a compliant progressive web app. So when I put together this list of what I thought sort of like was the useful, it really all came down to tooling, which I think is often the case. So first and foremost, we all have our browser preferences, but wow, Chrome does a pretty good job when it comes to validating your progressive web apps. I'm sure many of you know, but if you don't, you can go into the Chrome Dev Tools and just click the Audit tab, and you can, run some tests, and it'll come back and tell you these are, the list of rules that you must comply with to be a progressive web app, and it'll tell you whether you pass or fail. And if you fail the test, it'll lead you to more information and tell you how to fix it. And so I think that, anybody building progressive web apps needs to have some validation tool, and Chrome is certainly a great place to start as far as running those lighthouse tests. And it tests performance and search engine optimization, all kinds of different stuff. There's lots of tests out there, but Chrome is certainly a great place to start. And as far as, building a progressive web app, as I said before, I started using Kony for iOS, and I was just using, Visual Studio Code for my web dev. But I, quickly identified that if I can use the same, drag and drop, tooling to build these web apps, just like I built the iOS app, that was incredibly compelling for me. And then I was able to build a progressive web app before I really knew what I was doing in Kony, because you guys have automated a lot of it. And for example, things like the manifest, for some of the things you need to put in the manifest, you provided a UI that directs you on what the information is you need to include. So I think you've really simplified the out-of-the-box progressive web app dev, deploy, and host experience. And I see a question here from the audience as far as like the initial setup. There's definitely a couple concepts that you need to get your head around. And I think that your tooling has really progressed just even in the last couple of updates as far as directing the user. But leveraging Kony as the host really simplifies things, so you don't have to set up your your service worker environment. You don't have to set things up. It's all just sort of done for you. And that's really helpful as you're just getting through the initial learning curve and trying to get something working. So certainly the out-of-the-box experience for the visualizer was fantastic. The breakpoint concepts, I was just laughing to myself. I was like, wow, this is just so intuitive. Going in and having a canvas that shows me, my mobile and my tablet and my desktop separated by simple breakpoints where I could just click through and say, well, this is what it looks like on a desktop. This is what it looks like on a tablet. This is what it looks like on mobile. This is what it looks like in tablet landscape, mobile landscape. Being able to very quickly flip through those different views and make whatever tuning that I wanted to do, whether it was changing the font size or restructuring the layout or hiding stuff that I wanted to not show on the mobile device that I wanted to show on the desktop. It was very easy to do. It was very easy to visualize, and it made sense. And it's, the breakpoints, I think, are valuable in the sense that they're not as simple as mobile, tablet, desktop. I actually have multiple breakpoints for the desktop because some people have these huge monitors, and we wanted to take advantage of the larger real estate and just make sure that everything looked perfect. And we did more fine-tuning on some pages versus others, which was helpful as well. You can set different breakpoints for different pages in your website. So just a lot of customization capability without losing that easy visualization, so I know what I've got. And then pretty good representation as far as what I saw in my dev environment versus what I would see on my phone and on my desktop. So the breakpoints is a great concept, and I think that's the beginning, and I can't imagine doing it any other way, to be honest. Having all those media queries in my CSS files was a real nightmare, so I'm really a supporter of the breakpoints. And then the code and the content reuse, I think sometimes these decisions come across as like an either or, but I was able to, within Kony, literally copy and paste forms from the mobile to the tablet to the desktop, and just a tremendous amount of code reuse. So if I built something for the web, I could really quickly recreate it for iOS and literally copy paste, and then all my backend services and any sort of custom scripts or logic, I could reuse those functions as well. So having all that together in one integrated development environment is something that I've come to depend upon for my productivity. And then, I've mentioned this a couple times in different ways, but that low code to code level is really valuable. I don't trust anything if I can't see it. And when it comes to the way that the Kony Visualizer works, everything is represented in some form of code. So I can actually, when I check into Git, I can see exactly what changed. And that just gives me a high degree of confidence that I know what's happening under the covers. And I'm sure many of the folks on the phone feel the same. You don't want to just trust that it all works. You want to see and verify. And leveraging, your whatever, CI/CD pipelines you have, integration with Git, whatever, all that stuff that you would expect from an enterprise dev environment. You want to, you may not need that as you start out with your prototyping, but ultimately you want to leverage that. And so having that built in was hugely valuable because I didn't have to go, recreate that later down the road. So super happy with the visualizer, just continuing to give me the experience that I have with iOS, but now for the web. And then the second piece that I found valuable right away, but I really see the long-term value is leveraging the fabric. I know that folks are doing different types of development, and some front-end developers may not think so much about these back-end services, but having a framework of middleware is super valuable as far as being able to build something quickly. So, we all need storage. We all need authentication. So having those services at the ready and integrated into the actual designer, like literally dragging a login form onto the page, or, having a query for an employee record or a product record and just dragging that data onto the form was really valuable. But in knowing that I could then, quickly prototype, but I could also plug that in to connect to SAP or Amazon services or Azure or, whatever microservices I wanted to, or, data storage services I wanted to in the background. That just gave me a high level of like future proofing that I could do, and allowed me to keep my client light so I could upgrade the clients, but then move a lot of that heavy lifting to the back end where I could manage it separately. So, I wound up using the Fabric more than I thought I would. And as I look at my go-forward plans, there's certainly a lot more investment in data and services integration using the Kony Fabric across both progressive web app and the native apps. And the fact that it's literally the same service shared across the two with a nice layer of abstraction, you're leading people down the right path about how these apps should be built. So there's just far too much logic in the client, and I think we all benefit from appropriately creating those abstraction layers and having clean interfaces that can be updated on the back end, the front end without interdependency. So those are the spaces that I found useful, and starting with a tool that was simple but could grow with me. That was what I found in using both the Visualizer and the Fabric. And it's hard to even think about them as two products because they're so deeply integrated with each other.
Sure, that's very good. That's very good insight, Alex. I think we're coming to the conclusion of our session today. So, I think my last question would be, any feedback from your users or any future plans or any last closing comments before we get to the questions, Alex?
Sure, yeah, good question. So I'll keep it short. I want to answer these questions. What the feedback from the users was not a lot, but that's what I wanted, right? Our users expected a great experience, expected things to work, and it did. So that was the experience. I would say that, my audience is not a highly technical group of, millennials or something, They just want stuff to work and be beautiful. And so the feedback has been very positive. They're not quite sure what's happening under the covers, but it's been very positive. And I think that, we don't have support calls. We don't have people that are confused. Stuff just works. That was really our goal. So, positive feedback from that perspective. And my feedback has been positive that, I haven't had to spend a lot of time managing the code after we deployed it. So all in all, very, very positive as far as, what the user experience is and both, my experience in maintaining these apps.
Sure, Alex, that was very insightful session, and thank you once again for chatting with us today and sharing the demo. I think we have a few questions that we would like to get to. I think we want to get to all of the questions before we end today. So let's get started with that. So the first question I have over here is, I think it's an audience question that was asked before the webinar that was sent in to us. And the question is, what's the difference between responsive web, mobile web, and PWA? So let me answer that very quickly. I think so. Where web originated on mobile, when web originated on mobile, we had this concept called, being or having an adaptive web layout, right? So what that means is we have a web layout specifically designed for mobile. Then we had a web layout specifically, designed for desktop at that point in time. And then when tablets came out, the users used to, or the developers used to kind of design it again for our tablets, right? So it was, these could be, just a regular web application, or it could be, again, it kind of evolved to a single page application over time. And now what happened as that progressed is, responsive web came in, and that kind of became the de facto standard for web development for all users, right? And what responsive web did with, its capabilities of breakpoints and to be able to, enable users to change the layout between different form factors and things like that, and it caters to all the different variations in form factors, right? So that's where responsive web came in. So you build it once across different form factors. You send the different breakpoints for, providing the different capabilities. And so this is not adaptive, but then it's responsive, right? So based on the different sizes of browsers, the web application in itself kind of responds to the layout. And then progressive web app is a pretty, if you look at the web technology itself, progressive web app is a pretty, it's a pretty modern or it's pretty recent advancement. Now, what progressive web app provides is an advancement or a modern technology to your existing web applications, right? It tries to bridge that gap between the native application experience and the web application itself. It provides the capabilities that we talked about today, right? So things like providing the users to, use the application offline or being able to launch the application as fast as a native application would by pre-caching all the assets of the web application, or having an app shell which kind of makes your web application kind of look very similar to a native app, or being able to send web push notifications and things like that. So that's where PWA comes in. Now, a PWA could be a responsive web app in itself, or I shouldn't say could, and I think it should be a responsive web application, right? So that's one of the basic requirements. If you go to Chrome, the Google Chrome Lighthouse, one of the basic requirements that it talks about is being your PWA app being a responsive web in itself, right? So that's how I would define kind of the differences between responsive web, mobile web, and PWA. Going to the next question, I think, Alex, this question is for you. I think you did mention a bit of this, but then let me ask this question back in case you want to provide more details. I think the question is, was your start in using Kony intuitive, or did you need assistance or initial setup or configuration of the system, and before you started your development? So I think it's more on onboarding, like how easy was it to onboard to start using the responsive web and the PWA with Kony Visualizer?
It's a good question. I'll give a very honest answer. I looked at it as like the very first release that you guys had, and some of the documentation wasn't quite there yet, but now it is. So I think it's pretty intuitive as far as getting set up and going forward. Again, there's some concepts you have to get your head around, but you've done a really great job of clarifying what the steps are and creative, intuitive experiences, and the sort of filling out these wizard-like forms and just doing so much of the setup in the background. I would say, as I mentioned briefly before, I got my progressive web app up and running before I kind of knew what I was doing, because you had sort of simplified and auto set up the environment and everything I needed to do. So I think, it's pretty easy to get up and running with both progressive web app and then also just with iOS and Android as well.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Well, you were developing a lot of native apps with us before. I think Alex was just to remind everyone, Alex was our first few, customers for developing progressive web apps. Alex, a couple of more questions, I think, for you before I take one other question. So let me ask this question to you. So, are you using Kony Cloud, or are you on-prem? And then I'll add another question to this at the same time. And how long did it take to create your PWA, start to finish? Maybe you can answer both questions together.
Yeah, sure. So I'm using Kony Cloud, and as you'll remember, I was reticent to do that at the beginning because I had previously created other hosting environments with, whether it was S3, as a HTML5 host. I'm using the Kony Cloud. I'm very happy with the Kony Cloud. It just took some time for me to dig into the details and get more familiar with it. It does a great job, and I've abandoned my S3 hosting environment, and I'm very happily using Kony Cloud, especially given all the integration that it has with the Fabric. As far as how long did it take me to build it, to build a basic app, it was a couple of days. Now, having said that, I already had the media and the content and a general idea of what the design was. I changed a lot of that along the way, but yeah, I would say that if you wanted to have a one-day hackathon, I bet you could build a PWA app by the end of the day.
Sure, Alex.
There's one more question on here. So I wanted to respond to the question about the copy and paste, because that's a good question. Somebody called me out on it.
That was what I was going to ask you. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll admit I am guilty of copy and paste. one of the things that you can do with inside of Visualizer is you can just really quickly copy and paste. You can also create components and reuse them and make references. I find that when I'm in my like high velocity sort of prototyping mode, I'm just sort of like whipping through stuff and I'm, you know, creating as much code as I'm throwing away. It's pretty simple to create, you know, actions and components, and certainly from a JavaScript perspective, you'll create functions and then use those functions. So yeah, really it's, you shouldn't be copy and pasting for sure. You can if you like, but a lot of it is you're leveraging components. And Kony, you can package those components up as UI components or service components or data components. You've got, you know, more flexibility than I certainly haven't run into any bottlenecks as far as what I'm able to do as far as componentization. And certainly that's the right way to build the app.
Okay. I think we just got a new question in that asks, where is your database located? Was it on the Kony fabric, or did you use, how did you get your content, basically? I think that's where the question is. Like, was it MS SQL, MySQL, or something like that? Is it a database?
Yeah, the Kony fabric has a lot of great connectors. So previously, I had used connector into MySQL, but as I did more development with Amazon, I started to move to more of a flat data structure. So I've used the Kony fabric to connect to Cloud Search in Amazon, to connect to files loaded up in S3. And I've also, probably more commonly, as far as a data store, I've used DynamoDB with Lambda functions in front of it. And then I just route those through there's an API gateway connector for Amazon that's like an out-of-the-box connector in the Kony fabric. And so I like, doing a NoSQL flat data store in the back and then putting my logic in a Lambda function. And then I can just very easily consume those services via the Kony fabric, and it create a nice abstraction where all of my clients talk to the Kony fabric, and then the Kony fabric talks to the back end. So I can make changes on either side without creating any dependencies where I'm going to create a breaking change. I never have to update the client and the backend service at the same time. I'm very careful to keep those separated. So MySQL is very simple to do. And you've got great wizards that like import the data structure, and you can decide which fields you want to use. You can create mappings where you would, either manipulate or transform that data, or just even change the way the data is returned. You've got really nice mapping functionality there. So regardless of whatever format the data comes in from the back end, you can craft it into the right, schema. I usually pass JSON files back down to the client and then parse them on the client.
Okay, I think we have one last question which I'll briefly answer. I'll try to quickly answer this. Would high data entry forms be a candidate for PWA, normally back office desktop apps? So the quick answer to this is yes. So the analysts say that any web application that you are planning to develop today, it should be a progressive web app, right? So it's basically to say that, okay, if you're planning to develop a web application, it needs to be a PWA today, right? Because it provides a lot of capabilities, not just for simple apps, but for, pretty complex and pretty, pretty feature-filled applications as well. And Kony provides a lot of capabilities to help with the high data entry forms, or these complex applications as well. Like we have these capabilities where we have offline objects and things like that, right? So that kind of helps with all kinds of applications that you would want to build with PWA. So I think that was the last question. And Alex, thank you once again for chatting with us today and sharing the demo and answering these questions. I think that was a pretty impressive demo, and very insightful details there. And Mary, over to you. I think that's all from my side.
Thank you, Faizan. Thank you, Alex, for giving us a better idea of what PWAs are and how we can best leverage them in our organizations. That was outstanding. Again, we'll be posting the recording in Basecamp within the next 24 hours. Our next webinar will be on March 21st. We'll be revealing a bunch of new features available in our latest release of V8 SP4. Faizan and Suhas Bhatt will be presenting. Check the Basecamp homepage events panel for more information, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.